Whirlwind Five, also called the Ironmen, was arguably the best basketball team from Hartford, Vermont.
They won the state championship and went to the national tournament in Chicago and lost to Kentucky 48-30.
They were coached by Robert J. Hanley, and the Hartford High School gym was dedicated to him in 1964 after it passed.
What is the story of the Whirlwind Five?
So the Whirlwind Five is a very, it's like a legend in Hartford athletic history, but it's actually true. It's a true story, even though I think people today would have a hard time believing that this actually happened with the way that athletics are run now. So the Whirlwind Five was a basketball team. I want to say it was 1927, 28. Do you know which year
29.
it was? 29?
Yeah.
1929, there were only 5 basketball players on the Hartford team, varsity boys team. And their coach, Coach Hanley, was skilled, very skilled, and got the most out of the boys. And they had a good regular season and then ran through the state tournament. Of course, the state tournaments back then were done very, very differently than they are now. Back then, there was only one division, and almost every town in the state had a high school. There were not a lot of like union high schools. There was also a lot of religious schools around as well, like probably half a dozen. You know how Rice Memorial is now? There were a lot of Rice type schools back then. And they typically were the basketball powerhouses. There was one in Bennington, there was one in Barry, there were a couple I think in Burlington, maybe one up in Newport as well. So it was a tough tournament, and the Hartford boys, despite playing without a substitute, they defeated everybody, and I want to say they beat Springfield in the finals, maybe, or Rutland, and they were the state champs. Now, basketball had not been around in Vermont that long at that point in time, so maybe 20 years, and they made it to the finals around then again. So early on, Hartford boys basketball was a dominant team in Vermont. It was considered one of the best programs. Kind of like the Cubs and the Red Sox in Major League Baseball. In the first 15 years of the World Series, the Cubs or the Red Sox won 8 of them, right? And nobody knew that from that moment on, it would go almost 90 years before either one of them would win another one. So it's kind of the same thing here. Hartford boys basketball not only hasn't won a title, they haven't even been back to a championship game
Since then.
and they have only been to the Final Four semifinals maybe once or twice since 1929. I mean, we're coming up on the 90th anniversary of this team. So, you know, in your young adult life, you're going to be around for the 100th anniversary of the last boys basketball title if we don't figure this out, you know, pretty quickly. So the cool thing about that team, other than they played Iron Man, their coach was a legend. There's a plaque with his likeness on it outside the current gym, which was built in 1963. They named it after him, the Robert J. Hanley Gymnasium. You've heard us use that during pregame announcements. Now we like to reference that because not a lot of people know who he was or why the gym is named after him, so we're trying to get his name back around. Back then, you weren't just done when you won your state tournament. You could apply for the national tournament as well. And so the boys did, and they took a train from White River to Chicago and played a team from Kentucky and actually did all right. They didn't get blown out like you might expect them to.
48-30.
Yeah, I mean, it was a respectable score. But at that point in time, they were done. There was no, you know, double elimination or anything, and they headed back home, kind of like heroes. I mean, they really were local heroes for what they did. And they were nicknamed, I don't know when they were nicknamed the Whirlwind Five. I don't know if it was 40 years later, you know, a week later, maybe they called them that all season. I don't know if it was a historical reference or what they called them at the time. But they're now known as the Whirlwind Five of Hartford. And that's the basics of the story.
Why is the Whirlwind Five so important to Hartford history?
I think it was like the first kind of well-known accomplishment of the high school. Unfortunately, back then, girls' sports were just not held in the same regard. I think the girls' basketball team actually won some state titles before the boys did, and I want to say they were New England champs around the same time.
1927.
1927.
Yeah.
So 2 years before that, the girls' team went down to Gardner, Mass, and won the whole thing. But you don't really hear about that very much, and in fact, until last year, it wasn't really known at all.
Yeah.
But we have a newspaper article from that time that has the whole story of that girls' team. Girls' sports were considered more of a something for them to do. It was kind of cute for them to get to play as well, and their rules were different. But the boys' teams were what everybody paid more attention to, and it's nice to know that has changed. But I think it was, for that reason, it was the first major accomplishment for Hartford High School teams. They weren't the Hurricanes back then, but they still prided themselves, much like we do today, in being tough, resilient, and if we don't have talent, more talent than the opposition, we're gonna outwork you. And so this was a great example of that. There's only 5 of them. There was no subs. They had to play the whole game, and they didn't let them stop. They didn't let that stop them. So I think that's something that we kind of draw upon as inspiration and as pride, to know that group of guys did that. And for years, while those guys were alive, they would still hang around the gyms. They would be involved. Whether it was their kids or their grandkids, they would still be kind of in contact. And the last one passed away not too long ago, and that was kind of like the end of that era. But it was like a point of pride. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, because of the history and like the title drought, it's kind of taking on a life of its own. Kind of like, like I said before, the Cubs, the Red Sox. Pick a sport and figure out who's got the longest title drought, and Hartford boys basketball is, we're kind of assuming that role in Vermont. It'd be fun to do some research and see if there's a school that has a longer title drought.
Yeah.
It would be, it would be hard to find one.
Springfield maybe.
No, Springfield won one
really
10 years ago. I mean, that's what makes this group so important historically, is they did it. They won a Division I title, went to the national championship, and actually were competitive. And we haven't so much as sniffed success in boys basketball in a long. I don't know about the 30s, the 40s, the 50s.
I think there was one in the 40s.
Yeah, that was pretty decent. They didn't win a title.
They didn't.
No.
I think they might have been runner-ups or something.
Okay, so that would be good to get that listing. I know in '84, I think it was '84, they were an 8 or 9 seed, and they went up to St. Johnsbury, who was the number 1 seed, and they knocked them off, and it was a big upset. Like, St. J was not too happy about it, and people that remember it are still not too happy about it, because that's a basketball school. They've got a lot of longevity, a lot of pride in their basketball. And we went up there and knocked them off, and we made the semifinals, and we went up and we played, I think it was MSJ, and we lost in the final seconds. And I think we lost in a heartbreaking fashion, as in, like, we were up late and should have just iced it away, but something stupid happened or something like that. It'd be fun to get the actual story. And lost to MSJ. MSJ, I believe, went on to win that state title. So it seemed like we had an opportunity to win one.
Yeah.
In the mid '80s. That was not too long after Stretch Gillum got here. There's a guy, I think his name was Bob Simmis, who was on that team. I think that's Allie Simmis's uncle, and she's a student here, a freshman here right now. And it looked like we were going to be good again. And then the bottom just fell out. I mean, we got bad, like historically bad. You've heard me pick on Mr. Hathorn at morning meeting. Mr. Hathorn's 4 years here, they might have won 3 games total. At one point in time, they had the longest losing streak in the country. It was in the USA Today newspaper when they finally won a game. It was like, the drought is over. They won a game. And then since then, we just did the research this winter. since that '84 team, I think the program has only won maybe 2 playoff games, true playoff games, not the play-in games, but the playoff games to make the round of 16. So it's been a long time, and I think that every year that it goes on, it makes the Whirlwind 5 group that much more important and that much more legendary.
And how does the Whirlwind 5 affect Hartford's basketball today?
Well, it's probably more of a monkey on their back than it is anything else. I mean, I feel like, when I played, we didn't realize it had been that long, and we're like, oh, it'd be cool to win another one at some point in time. But now it's been another 20 years, and we haven't come close to doing well still, and it doesn't look like we're gonna do well anytime soon. So I think now it starts to feel like, not a curse, because something stupid would have had to have happened, but it feels like a drought. It feels like a really, really long drought. And I mean, we're gonna hit 90 years this next year, and I mean that means that there's not a lot of people that were even alive the last time Hartford boys basketball team won a championship. Maybe that's what we got to find, all the people in town that remember that team, and bring them to a game or something, and try to change the mojo associated with the team. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to talk to the coaches and the players on the current basketball team and in the program to see what they think about the Whirlwind 5, and if they even think about it, if it impacts them at all, if they feel like any pressure or anything like that. I do know this: whatever pressure they feel to try to break the drought would be it would be so intense for the team that finally wins it, because I bet they would go down in history themselves, and in their own way, which would be really cool. I don't know if you've had any teams or programs that are known for such a long drought. We have programs that have never won a title, like softball has never won a title, but you don't consider that a drought.
Yeah.
Because it's not long time in between titles. It's just we never had one. The hockey team has always been successful. Football had a drought between 93 and 2000, whatever it was. That felt like a drought, but that's just because we were used to winning them so much. Baseball, 73 to 2009, I think it was. So that felt like a bit of a drought, but again, we've won a couple. Soccer's never won one. So if you talk about the teams that we've had that have won state championships, I think this is the one.